So we're in the season of Advent, and Advent has different possibilities and different interpretations. And for the first 1900 years of Christianity, Advent meant the time of looking for the second coming of Christ. And in the last 100 years, it's been more emphasis on the first coming of Christ in the manger. And it has some consequences how people celebrate Advent. Some of my friends in the Roman Catholic Church or in the Episcopalian Church or in the Lutheran Church, when they practice Advent, it means no Christmas carols until Christmas Eve. And it means you don't decorate your tree until Christmas Eve. And it's also a time of fasting until that time when you could celebrate. But I was raised actually without Advent. I was in a Presbyterian church. We call it low church because it means it didn't have like Advent or Lent. It was really the holy days were Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, and Easter and Good Friday and Palm Sunday. But the point is this: what happens when people go with the strict idea of Advent? I remember the music director at the Urbana Presbyterian Church was complaining because his choir couldn't do a Christmas cantata. He was really upset about that because he had to wait till Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or after Christmas to do a cantata. He was not happy about it. And I was talking to one of my friends who's a Presbyterian pastor, Rob Dyer. I says, well, how do you do it? Do you do Christmas carols? And he says, of course, Ed, I do Christmas carols. And so I've noticed about half the pastors in the Presbyterian denomination will say, we will just do Advent without Christmas carols. And my friend Howard Self was like that. And the other half will say, yeah, but I'm on the side of Christmas carols and I'm on the side of a Christmas cantata to get us ready for Christmas. Now, as we look to the coming of Jesus, there's been a lot of confusion about that. And in the Bible reading today that Deanna read, it's a pretty scary story here because things look like they're going to get really bad before the Messiah returns. That's also led to some problems because when I went to Wheaton College, they had a big theological fight. Now, theological means theo is God, ology is study. It's a study of God, theology. And on one part, which was Wheaton College, they would say, we are pre-millennial. Millennium means 1,000 years of the reign of Christ. Jesus will come before the reign of 1,000 years. Then there was another group, we are post-millennial. Jesus will come after the 1,000 year of good times. And myself, I'm what they call a pan-millennial because it'll all pan out okay in the end. But rather than get all worked up because it could lead you down the wrong path, there was a pastor at Wheaton, Illinois, who told his people, don't do anything good to help Chicago because things have got to get worse. And if they don't get worse because you're doing good, Jesus' return will be delayed. I'm thinking, he joined the other side. You know, he was not on Jesus' side when he said that. So it leads to confusion. And Jesus in our passage says, nobody knows, I don't even know, Jesus says, when that day will be. Now, there have been times in the past where a religious leader will say, everybody, get a white robe. Choir, your robes will do. We're going to go on the hilltop, and this is the day that Jesus will return. We're all going to be standing on the hilltop, waving, waiting for Jesus. And they start waiting at 8 o'clock and 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And they're beginning to look kind of askance at the religious leader because nothing's happened. And in the end, the guy would say, and this happened several times, I guess I miscalculated the day. But Jesus said, no one knows the day. The other funny thing with this, as you watch for the coming of Jesus, is that there was a lady in the Carolinas a few years ago who said, on a certain day, the world's going to end, and Jesus is going to come. It's all going to be over. But she didn't sell her house. She did not sell her car. So when she was wrong, she just continued. In other words, she didn't put her money by her teaching, and a lot of people were led astray by that. But Jesus is saying there are always opportunities for service. And when I come, he says this, will I find faith? Will I find faith on earth? And faith means, could I believe Jesus and begin to practice what Jesus says, even if I don't want to? Will I find faith on earth? And will I find love? And he's saying, be alert. Be alert, because ministry can happen at any time. Service can happen at any time. Now, I also like the teaching about being alert, because he also says, be awake. That's a really good talk for my sermon. Would you please try to stay awake? So that would be very helpful. It didn't work in my country church, because those farmers, they'd work all week in the field. They get into a warm country church. You could just start seeing those farmers nod off, and I gave them a very deep, deep sleep. Now the question is, could we be alert, and could we be prepared? And God made preparations for Jesus. Gabriel, the archangel, had to make a lot of presentations to Zechariah, to Elizabeth, to Mary, and even to Joseph in a dream. And then he had to gather the heavenly host to make a presentation to the shepherds in the field. He had work to do. Several other things happened that prepared the way for the coming of the Messiah. One was the Roman roads. The Roman roads were built so the chariots and the soldiers could move quickly to go to war. And those roads, some of them are still being used today. They're great roads. They're so solid how they built them. And that meant when the missionaries went out from Jerusalem, they could really travel. The other thing that happened that helped for Jesus' gospel to come out was the Greek language. Alexander the Great, we should call him Alexander the Great Butcher. He killed hundreds of thousands of people, but he gave the whole world the Greek language. And so there was a common language, and our scriptures of the New Testament are written in Greek. That was the common language. And so we have this as well, the common language, which helped people to understand the gospel, to understand the good news. And the other thing that was very big was the Pax Romana, which meant the great Roman peace. They conquered everybody. And that meant the borders were open. And you could travel from Israel to Syria. Try doing that today. Going from Israel to Syria. Try to go from Iraq to Iran today. Try to enter Afghanistan today. The borders often are sealed, but there the borders were open, and the early Christians could go around sharing the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So things were being prepared. And then Jesus comes. And how does he come? He comes in a barn in a cave. A cave is a naturally kind of a constant temperature. He's born there. They have caves outside of Bethlehem where they watched over the sheep in the fields. And I had the privilege of being there and seeing the black roof of the cave from all the fires of hundreds and hundreds of years there. And so he comes, but he's prepared to come because he's going to identify with you and me. He identifies with the poor. His life's in danger from King Herod. He's a refugee in Egypt, and he's a worker as a carpenter as he travels around Galilee. In other words, there's preparations for Jesus to identify with me and with you. It's just wonderful, wonderful preparations. But the question for us is, are our hearts prepared? Are we prepared for Jesus? And I want to share one of my very favorite Christmas stories, and it comes from the Korean War. And we've had people in our church family serve in the Korean War. And one of them, his name was Dwight Kinsey. He was serving he was a soldier, and the Chinese had overrun the northern part of Korea. His unit was overrun. And as the unit was surrendering, because after the fight, they were just overrun with these thousands and thousands of Chinese, the American planes began coming in and firing. And a sergeant next to him said, "Don't run. Walk. Follow me." They just walked off slowly. If they ran, people would have been suspicious. They just walked off as if that was the business that they were to do. And it took weeks to travel south. They had to dig potatoes out of the ground, in the frozen ground, and they finally made it to safety, to the American lines. But everybody else in that entire unit was killed. You know, you got to be ready, you got to be prepared, and you got to use your head. What can I do? And this Korean story I just love comes, and it's written by a sergeant, and his name was Wayne Montgomery. And I just love this story. And he said, it was in Christmas in Korea, 1951. It was late afternoon on December the 24th. After a cold, miserable ride by truck in the snow, I was back in our command post. Shedding wet clothing, I relaxed on a cot and dozed off. Now, I want to mention something about ministry. Ministry happens in interruptions. It's not really scheduled. It happens in interruptions. A young soldier came in, and in my sleep-fog condition, I heard him say to the clerk, "I wish I could talk to the sergeant about this." And Sergeant Montgomery says, "Go ahead. I'm not asleep." The soldier then told me about a group of Korean civilians 4 miles to the north who had been forced to leave their burning village. You know, the Chinese had burned a village. The group included one woman ready to give birth. His information had come from a Korean boy who said these people badly needed help. My first reaction was, how could we ever find the refugees in this snowstorm? Besides, I was dead tired. Yet something inside me told me I should try. So he says, go get Crail, Bringle, and Graff. And when these soldiers arrived, I told them of my plan, and they agreed to accompany me. We gathered together some food and blankets. Then I saw a box of Christmas packages in the corner of the office. They were presents sent over from charity organizations in the United States. We collected an armful of packages and started out in the storm by jeep. After driving several miles, the snow began to be so blinding that we decided to approach the village by foot. After what seemed like hours, we came to an abandoned mission. The roof was gone, the walls were intact. We built a fire in the fireplace, wondering what to do next. Graff opened one of the Christmas packages in which he found the small artificial Christmas trees and candles. He placed these trees on the mantle of the fireplace. It made no sense to go on in this blizzard. We finally decided to leave the food, leave the blankets and presents there in the mission in the hopes that some needy people would find them. Then we groped our way through the storm back to the command post. Now we got 4 months later. In April 1952, I was wounded in action and taken to a hospital at Wonhu. One afternoon, while basking in the sun, a Korean boy joined me. He was a talkative lad, and I only half listened as he rambled on and on. Then he began to tell me a story that literally made me jump out of my chair. After he finished, I took the boy to the chaplain. He helped me find an elder in the local Korean church who verified the boy's story. The elder says this. A lot of the Koreans really like the Presbyterian church. So, yes, it was a true miracle, an act of God, the Korean churchman said. Then he told how on the previous Christmas Eve, he was one of a group of Korean civilians who had been wandering around the countryside for days after the North Koreans had burned their village. They were nearly starved when they arrived at an old mission. A pregnant woman in their group was in desperate condition. As we approached the mission, we saw smoke coming from the chimney. We feared the North Korean soldiers were there, but decided to go in anyway. To our relief, the mission was empty. But lo and behold, there were candles on the mantle, along with little trees. There were blankets and boxes of food and presents. It was a miracle. The old man's eyes were filled with tears how they described how they all got down on their knees and thanked God for their deliverance. They made a bed for the pregnant woman and built a little shelter over her. There was plenty of wood to burn and food to eat, and they were comfortable for the first time in weeks. And it was Christmas Eve. The baby was born on Christmas Day, the man said. The situation could not have been much different from that birth years and years ago. On the following morning, American soldiers rescued the Koreans, who later became the nucleus of a Christian church in a village where I was recovering. You never know when you have a special role to play in some of God's miracles. But that's how God reacts. We don't want to do it necessarily, but some inner voice, God's voice, tells us to try to do something. But to do it with love, to do it with wisdom, to do it the best way we can. On Christmas Eve, we light candles, and the kids and I get one of these. They aren't lit, but you all get the lit candles. But you see, the light represents Jesus' light and love. And your love shines out. It shines out in interruptions. Who needs your comforting words? Who needs your helping hand? We don't know. But whenever it does happen, you're Jesus' presence. And it's unexpected. But Jesus says, well done, good and faithful servant. And that's when ministry happens. Ministry happens at any time, at any place, and sometimes when it's completely unexpected. And this is our first Advent meditation.